The day my husband handed me the divorce papers, he froze every dollar I could touch and smiled like he was about to watch me disappear. He thought I would beg. He thought I would cry. He thought I would stand there in my nice coat and expensive shoes and finally understand what kind of man he had always been. What he did not know was that I had already understood that years ago. And for 8 years I had been preparing for this exact morning. You know the kind of story people expect when they hear that sentence. A woman signs the papers. The husband locks the accounts. She is left with nothing. Then comes the slow collapse. The humiliation. The panic. The calls no one answers. The suitcase by the curb. The cheap mascara running down her face while everyone says she should have seen it coming. But this is not that story. This is the story of what happens when a man spends years teaching his wife to survive on scraps, without realizing she is using every scrap to build an exit. My name is Evelyn Reed. And the day Julian Croft decided to end our marriage was the day he finally stepped into a trap I had been setting thread by thread in complete silence. From the outside, our life looked perfect. We lived high above the city in a glass-walled penthouse that looked out over the river and the park beyond it. The floors gleamed. The kitchen looked like something out of a magazine. The doorman knew us by name. The florist downstairs sent up arrangements so large they looked like public displays instead of personal gifts. People saw us at charity dinners and rooftop events and assumed I was lucky. Julian was handsome in the way money sharpens a man. Tailored suits. Controlled smile. Confident walk. The kind of man who always seemed to know where the center of the room was because he had spent most of his life making sure it belonged to him. And beside him, I looked exactly the way he wanted me to look. Elegant. Soft-spoken. Well-kept. Grateful. He used to tell people I had a calming presence. What he meant was that I knew how to disappear on command. That is the thing people often misunderstand about control. They think it starts with shouting, threats, bruises, broken plates. Sometimes it does. But sometimes it starts with something much quieter. An extra credit card with your name on it but not your account. A warm smile that says, "You do not need to worry about money. I will take care of everything." An allowance handed to you like affection. A joke at dinner about how lucky you are not to deal with real work. A correction in front of guests. A hand on the small of your back that looks tender from far away but feels, to you, exactly like direction. Julian never had to scream to make his point. He preferred structure. Systems. Dependencies. He liked to design a life where your options grew so small that his wishes began to feel like reality. When we married, he gave me a supplemental card and said it with a smile. "Buy whatever the house needs. If you need anything else, just ask." I said thank you. Not because I was naive. Because at 24, I still confused generosity with safety. And because women are taught to hear a certain tone in a man's voice and mistake it for reliability. First, it did feel like comfort. He handled investments, taxes, mortgage documents, banking. I handled the apartment, social obligations, family dinners, gifts, scheduling, travel logistics, staff coordination, his mother when she was difficult, his clients' wives when they needed charming company, and the 1,000 invisible tasks that make a powerful man's life feel effortless. He called me lucky. I called it partnership. The truth sat somewhere in the middle for about a year. Then the small humiliations became routine. If I asked a question about finances, he answered as if I had interrupted a lecture. If I bought something he did not approve of, he would not yell. He would lean back, amused, and ask me why I thought I understood value. If I disagreed with him in private, he would become colder the next day in public, just enough for me to feel it, never enough for anyone else to notice. And if I ever mentioned going back to work, even casually, he had a script for that too. Why would you want that stress? I provide more than enough. Do you really want strangers ordering you around? Do you know how rare it is to have a husband who wants his wife comfortable? Always the same tone. Kind. Reasonable. Deadly. People imagine manipulation as a storm. But sometimes it is architecture. It is a hallway built so slowly you do not notice the doors closing until you have forgotten where the exits used to be. I learned that lesson in our second year of marriage, at a dinner party Julian hosted for investors and political donors. I had spent all day arranging the seating, checking dietary restrictions, dealing with flowers that arrived in the wrong shade, and helping the chef recover from a delivery issue. By the time the guests arrived, I was exhausted but everything looked flawless. One of the women asked how I managed so much. Before I could answer, Julian smiled and said, Evelyn has one of those wonderfully simple minds that thrives on domestic detail. The table laughed. Not cruelly. Just enough. I smiled too. Because that is what women do when they realize humiliation has been packaged as wit. Later that night, I asked him why he said it. He loosened his tie and looked honestly confused. Said what? You know what? Oh, that. Evelyn, if you are going to be this sensitive, you are going to make life very difficult for yourself. For yourself. Not for us. Not for the marriage. For yourself. As if the injury had appeared inside me without his help. That was the first night I sat awake after he fell asleep and understood something I had not wanted to understand before. Julian did not just enjoy being admired. He enjoyed being necessary. And the only way to remain necessary was to make sure I never felt fully capable without him. That is when I started keeping records. Not because I had a full plan yet. Because some part of me had begun to understand that memory alone would not save me. I started small. Receipts. Dates. Comments. Transfers. Conversations that felt wrong in ways too subtle to prove if I ever tried to explain them out loud. Then I began to save. If the grocery total came to one amount and I rounded another way, a little stayed with me. If he gave me cash for errands, some folded into envelopes. If I sold a dress he never noticed missing, the money went somewhere he would never think to look. Never enough to attract suspicion. Never enough to feel dramatic. Just a slow correction against dependence. At night, while he slept, I taught myself to read financial statements. At first, I barely understood the language. Liquidity ratios. Debt structures. Contingent liabilities. Shell entities. Short-term exposure. I read articles until my eyes hurt. I watched old lectures on muted brightness. I copied terms into notebooks like prayers in a language I had not been born speaking. Then came Maya. Maya and I had known each other since college, before marriage made our lives uneven in ways friendship struggles to survive. She had become an accountant. Quiet. Careful. The kind of person who never wasted words because she had learned that accuracy travels further without decoration. We had not been close for years when I called her one afternoon under the excuse of lunch. I asked 3 ordinary questions. Then one dangerous one. How hard is it to disappear financially without doing anything illegal? She looked at me for a long time before answering. Hard. But not impossible. That was the beginning. Not of revenge. Of authorship. Of slowly becoming real to myself again. There is a moment in every controlled life when survival changes shape. At first, you endure because you still hope the person will change. Then you endure because leaving looks too expensive. Then one day, often very quietly, you stop enduring for them at all. You endure for the version of yourself that might still exist beyond the walls of the life they built around you. That was me by year 4. By year 6, I no longer asked Julian questions about money. I asked better questions in other places. What happens when a company looks strong on the outside, but starts plugging small holes with frantic decisions? What kind of men over-leverage when they are scared? What does panic look like in paperwork before it looks like panic on a face? Julian's company was not failing then, but it was expanding too fast. Prestige projects. Land deals. Complicated partnerships. Too much confidence tied to timing. He liked scale because scale looked like invincibility. He liked complexity because complexity kept other people dependent on his explanations. He also liked assuming no one near him was learning, least of all me. By the 7th year of our marriage, I knew 3 things with absolute clarity. First, Julian would never leave me kindly. Second, if he ever felt his control slipping, he would become reckless. And third, if I wanted to survive him, survival would not be enough. I would need timing. So I waited. I smiled when appropriate. I hosted. I dressed for photographs. I sat through his mother's little jabs and his colleagues' wives asking what I did all day. I became, in the eyes of the world, exactly what he had trained me to look like. A decorative woman with no map of her own life. The thing about being underestimated for years is that people begin to relax around you. They speak too freely. They sign too quickly. They forget that silence is not ignorance. And then one morning, after a week of strange calm and 3 evenings where Julian stayed later than usual, he walked into the breakfast room with a leather folder in his hand and said, in the same tone someone might use to discuss whether we need to finalize something. He set the folder down beside my coffee. Divorce papers. No apology. No performance. Just paperwork. For 1 second I did not move. Not because I was surprised. Because the moment had finally arrived, and the body always takes half a breath longer than the mind. Julian took my silence as devastation. He leaned against the counter and watched me the way certain people watch the first crack in a dam. I think this is for the best, he said. We have become misaligned. Misaligned. As if marriages end the way artwork does in a hallway. I looked at the papers, then at him. And because 8 years of preparation are useless if you cannot still perform when the curtain rises, I let my face go pale. I whispered, "Is this really happening?" His eyes changed. Not softer. Brighter. "Yes, Evelyn. It is." He had already planned the scene in his head. My collapse would complete it. I lowered myself into the chair. I let my fingers tremble once against the page. Just once. Enough. "When did you decide this?" "A long time ago," he said. That was a lie. Men like Julian do not make clean decisions a long time ago. They accumulate irritations, opportunities, replacements, and moments of self-justification until one day they call the pile certainty. But I nodded as if I believed him. "What do you want me to do?" "Sign. Not discuss. Not ask. Sign." So I did. Because the real danger was never the divorce. The real danger was what he thought divorce would do to me. We went to the county clerk's office 2 days later. The whole ride there, Julian was in a hurry. He checked his watch twice, took 2 calls, sent 1 email, and treated the entire event like an item between more important items. That was his way. Make cruelty administrative and it starts to feel efficient. I sat beside him in the back of the car and watched our reflection in the dark glass. He looked like a man clearing a nuisance from his schedule. I looked like a woman trying not to faint. The paperwork took less than an hour. The signatures were final. The stamps came down in red. And the moment we stepped outside, Julian finally gave himself permission to enjoy it. He turned toward me with that thin, practiced smile and said, "For old time's sake, I will explain what happens next." He enjoyed explaining consequences. "Your access to the penthouse was removed this morning. The locks were changed at 8. The housekeeper packed your personal things. They are with the doorman. Your supplementary card was canceled yesterday. All digital payment links tied to my accounts have been disconnected. And the debit card I used for your monthly allowance is frozen." He paused. Then he added, almost gently, "You have no salary, no independent credit history worth mentioning, and no place in that apartment anymore. So I suggest you become practical quickly. It is a strange feeling when a nightmare you rehearsed in private finally speaks out loud." I had imagined this so many times that hearing it brought me not fear, but a sharp little stillness. Still, I let my mouth part in disbelief. "Julian, why would you do this?" The smile widened. "Because now you will understand the difference between being protected and being helpless. There are sentences you never forget because they reveal the shape of a person all at once. That was one of them. He wanted not just to leave me. He wanted to author my collapse. He wanted me to experience dependence as punishment." I lowered my eyes. I let one tear gather but not fall too quickly. "Please do not do this." A clerk near the door glanced at us. Julian noticed. That made him even crueler. "Come on, Evelyn. You knew this life was mine. Surely you did not think you were entitled to keep living in it after this." Then he leaned closer and said in a softer voice, "Meant only for me. You should call your parents. Maybe they can make room for you again." There it was. The final blade. Because he knew my parents had their own problems. My brother's business had failed months before. My parents had co-signed something they never should have. The bank had been leaning on them. Julian knew all of it. Not because I told him much. Because men like him always know where your weak walls are. I gripped the document in my hand until the paper bent. And then I did the most important thing I would do all day. I let him leave believing he had seen me break. He got into the car. The sedan pulled away. The tail lights vanished around the corner. And the moment they did, my face changed. I stood still for 3 full seconds. Then I opened my handbag, reached into a slit in the lining, and pulled out an old flip phone no one had ever noticed. I pressed one number. Maya answered before the first ring finished. "How did it go?" Exactly as planned, I said. He blocked everything from his side. A pause. Then calmly, good. I looked at the stamped copy of the divorce papers in my hand. The red ink looked almost ceremonial. Activate Project Typhoon, I said. Notify everyone. No delays. No improvisation. When I hung up, I slipped the phone back into the lining and walked, not toward a taxi stand but toward the bus stop. A woman with a fresh divorce and no access to money should not be seen stepping into a private car she had secretly arranged. She should be seen doing what broken women do. Walking. Sweating. Counting bills. Looking lost. I sat at a bus stop bench and emptied my palms slowly. A few small notes. Some coins. Enough to look humiliating. Not enough to look fake. The woman beside me glanced once, then away. Good. Witnesses never know they are witnesses. A vendor selling lottery tickets leaned toward me and said, "Soft as pity, tough day, honey?" I nodded. Her face changed with instant recognition. The kind women reserve for other women without needing facts. "It gets better," she said. I gave her the saddest smile I could manage. "I hope so." Then I boarded the bus and rode it all the way downtown, past neighborhoods that knew nothing about me, past glass buildings where men like Julian did business, past restaurants where wives pretended not to notice each other pretending. Every stop felt like movement, but what I was really doing was disappearing in the correct direction. I got off near an alley full of repair shops, narrow diners, laundromats, and old buildings divided into rooms small enough that no one asked questions if you paid on time. The SRO I chose was exactly what it needed to be. Forgettable. The superintendent looked me over, saw the suitcase, saw the coat, saw the face trying not to cry, and knew the genre of my life before I said a word. "Just you?" he asked. "Just me. Deposit is 1 month. Shared bathroom. No noise after 11. I handed him cash. He unlocked a door on the second floor and left me there with a metal bed frame, one window, an old fan, and a bulb that turned the room yellow instead of bright. When the door closed, I sat on the bed and listened. Footsteps in the hall. Faucet somewhere. A radio through the wall. The sounds of ordinary struggle. I had not fallen, but I needed the world to believe I had. That afternoon I waited 15 minutes before making any real calls, just in case someone had followed me or paid someone to watch where I went. Julian trusted money more than people, but money still buys eyes. Then I took out my second phone, the one with a full battery and encrypted apps, and called Maya. "Funds secure?" I asked. "The 3 backup accounts are untouched," she said. "The shell structures are clean. No movement on his radar." "What about the upstate client?" "Second invoice delay hit their desk this morning." "Good. Let them worry. You really think he still has not connected any of this to you?" I looked around the room at the rust on the radiator, the suitcase by the wall, the little square of late sun on the floorboards. "No," I said. "I think he thinks he knows exactly who I am. And that is better." That evening I bought a $5 meal from a street cart and paid in coins. The vendor glanced at my face and added extra sauce without charging me. Kindness from strangers can be painful when you are pretending to be ruined, but it can also be useful. By 9 that night, the first message came. "I heard what happened. Are you all right? Susan." Wife of one of Julian's oldest associates. A woman who never carried information so much as she circulated it with perfume. I replied with perfect restraint. "I found a room. No accusation. No detail. Just enough to feed the right mouse." She texted back almost immediately. "Julian can be so cold." I did not answer. Silence edits itself inside other people's minds. That night, I lay on the metal bed and opened the notebook I had carried for years. Inside it were pages of dates, names, irregular transfers, memorized patterns, and the private archaeology of a marriage built on control. I added one line. "He thinks I am economically dead." Then I turned off the light and listened to the fan. There is a kind of relief no one tells you about when a controlled life finally breaks open. Even before justice. Even before safety. The relief of no longer pretending to yourself. The next morning I woke before dawn, washed my face in cold water, tied my hair back, and went to the corner coffee shop near the alley. I ordered the cheapest iced coffee and sat in the same seat I would later use 3 more times. Not because routine comforted me, because routine creates witnesses. To anyone watching, I was a woman trying to look busy while her life collapsed. In reality, I was mapping the sequence of pressure points now starting to tighten around Julian. By 10, Maya called. His finance team requested a liquidity clarification. Only a clarification? For now. And the client? Escalating. Good. I hung up, took a sip of coffee, and let the bitterness sit on my tongue. Julian hated bitter things. He liked sweetness, polish, the illusion that unpleasant truths could be managed if addressed in expensive rooms with enough authority. At 11, another call came. Unknown number. Miss Reed, we have an administrative position available. A friend passed along your name. The salary is modest but stable. There it was. The first baited test. Someone from Julian's world or close enough to it, trying to see whether I was truly desperate. I let 2 beats pass. Thank you, I said softly. Could I think about it? Of course. When I hung up, I smiled into my cup. A starving woman does not say yes too quickly. A proud woman does not say yes at all. I needed to look like neither. That afternoon, I walked to the bus terminal and stood there longer than necessary with my suitcase beside me. People moved around me in currents. No one knew me. No one cared. And yet in cities like this, there is always someone half-looking, half-guessing, building small stories out of strangers. Good. By evening, Julian texted. Have you come to your senses? Not where are you? Not are you safe? Have you come to your senses? Meaning, are you ready to return to the version of yourself I understand? I replied, I need time. 3 minutes later. Do not test my patience. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. That was the thing about men who depend on control. Patience is only composure with a deadline. That night, I sent an email from an account I had never used before. No subject line. One attachment. A risk analysis report tied to one of Julian's real estate projects near an industrial corridor outside the city. Not a lie. Not a threat. Not a confession. Just the kind of document that makes the right person sit up straighter. The recipient was Daniel Sterling. I had known his name for 2 years. A corporate attorney with a reputation for being careful, expensive, and allergic to theatrics. The kind of man who only moved when the paperwork could survive light. I turned off the phone after sending the file and lay back on the bed. The ceiling above me was cracked in one corner. I remember staring at that crack and thinking how often collapse begins not with one large break, but with a line small enough to ignore. On the 3rd morning, I woke to rain. The room smelled damp and metallic. I opened the window a little and let in air that smelled like wet pavement and old brick. Maya called before 8. The bank sent the delinquency notice. Send it late in the day, I said. Not early. Let it ruin his afternoon. The upstate client says 2 more days and they reconsider. Let them. You are enjoying this a little. No, I said. I am respecting timing. That day I accepted the job interview. A small office in a commercial building with old elevators and stale air. The manager looked at my thin resume and asked the kind of questions people ask women after divorce when they are trying to sound neutral. It has been some time since you worked, right? Yes. You were at home? Yes. And now you need stability? I lowered my eyes. Yes. The pay is not much. I understand. The work is repetitive. That is fine. He smiled with the confidence of a man who believes desperation can be measured on sight. We will be in touch. Perfect. When I left the building, I bought a burner SIM card from a shop a few blocks away and walked home by a different route. By then, Daniel Sterling had replied. Meet me at the river park tomorrow at 8:30. No greeting. No questions. No promise. He had taken the bait. The next morning I arrived 15 minutes early and sat on a bench facing the water. The city looked cleaner from there. As if power could purify itself by standing near reflective surfaces. Daniel Sterling approached without hurry. White shirt. Dark slacks. Posture too controlled to be casual. He sat opposite me. Miss Reed. Mr. Sterling. No handshake. Your report was interesting, he said. Where did the data come from? Living with the person who created it. That earned the smallest shift in his expression. You understand the seriousness of what you are implying. I understand the seriousness of waiting any longer. I handed him a thin file from my bag. Cash flow discrepancies. Exposure on the industrial project. A preliminary legal risk summary regarding environmental liabilities he believed could be delayed past disclosure. Sterling opened the file and turned 2 pages. Then 3. Then another. The wind moved the corners of the paper. How long have you had this? Long enough to know I should not bring you anything I cannot support. Why bring it now? Because he made his move. He looked up at me then, not as if he trusted me, but as if he had revised the category he had placed me in. And what do you want in return? I did not answer immediately. That was deliberate. Because people like Daniel Sterling know the smell of vengeance, and vengeance without discipline makes bad allies. Finally I said, I want the truth examined by people he cannot charm, bully, or outspend in a single afternoon. And I want to survive what comes after that. He closed the file. We will verify. If this holds, there is no halfway point. There never was, I said. He handed me a business card and stood. Wait for my call. As he walked away, the old flip phone in my bag buzzed. Unknown number. Heard you met with a stranger. I did not need a signature on the message. Julian had started to feel movement around him, and movement always makes frightened men more curious than careful. I did not reply. Back at the SRO, I pulled the curtains, organized my papers, and ate lunch from the alley diner downstairs. At exactly 11, Maya called. Sterling's team requested supporting documents. Send only what we prepared for first release. Julian slammed his fist on a conference table this morning. I smiled. He always needed noise when fear began to show. By afternoon, Julian texted again. What are you doing? I ignored it. 5 minutes later, he called. I answered on the 4th ring. Where are you? Out. Doing what? Looking for work. A pause. Then a dry laugh. A job. Yes. Where? Anywhere that pays. His breathing changed. Even over the phone I could hear it. Not anger yet. Not panic exactly. Something more fragile. Disorientation. The first crack in a man who had built his confidence on being irreplaceable. Come back and talk, he said, softer now. I can help you. Help me? I can give you something to get started. How much? 30,000. I closed my eyes. He once spent more than that on a dinner he later described as disappointing. I will think about it, I said. Do not take too long. I know. Then I hung up first. Never underestimate what it does to a controlling person when you end the call before they do. That evening, I packed a smaller bag and laid out simple clothes for the next day. Not because I feared Daniel Sterling, because I understood rooms. The next morning, his office assistant led me into a conference room where everything looked expensive enough to discourage lies. Sterling arrived with a thicker file. We conducted preliminary verification, he said. Your concerns are not minor. I said nothing. Silence had become one of my sharper tools. He continued. If we proceed, there will be an inquiry. Possibly multiple. Internal pressure will reach him before any official process does. When that happens, he will counterattack. I am prepared. Are you? He leaned slightly forward. People often believe they are prepared for truth. What they are prepared for is relief. Those are not the same thing. I held his gaze. I have not confused them. That seemed to satisfy him. Good. During this phase, reduce direct contact with him. Maintain routine. Maintain cover. If he believes you are weak, let him. I almost laughed. Mr. Sterling, I said, I have been letting him believe that for years. For the first time, he smiled. Then we are speaking the same language. When I left his office, Julian had already texted 3 times. Where are you? You are avoiding me. I know more than you think. I turned off the screen and went back to the SRO in the rain. That night, he called just before midnight. Where are you? He asked, voice taut. Resting. I am nearby. Open the door. I went to the window and looked down. A black car sat at the alley entrance with its lights off. He would not come farther. Men like Julian like danger only when it arrives with valet service. Go home, I said. Do not tell me what to do. Then leave if it is your idea. A long silence. Evelyn, he said, lower now, almost dangerous. Do not play games with me. I looked at the dark car below. I am not the one losing control, Julian. Then I hung up. The next morning, Maya called before I finished breakfast. He has people looking for you now. Let them look. The bank called your parents. I went still. For the first time in days, real heat moved through me. What did they say? Document verification. Pressure tactics. Nothing direct yet. I stared out the window into the alley, at laundry lines and metal fire escapes and the kind of lives Julian had never once been required to understand. This was always the risk. Power that cannot immediately locate the woman it wants to punish often moves toward the people who raised her. At noon I visited my parents in New Jersey. Their house looked smaller than I remembered. Not because it had changed, but because worry shrinks everything around it. My father sat on the porch, older than last month. My mother opened the door before I reached it, as if she had been standing just out of sight, listening for my car that I no longer had. "Are you all right?" she asked before anything else. I hugged her. "I am managing." That is not what I asked. Inside, over tea no one drank much of, I told them only what they needed, that there might be questions, that they should not sign anything new, that if anyone pressed, they were to direct everything through a number I wrote down for Daniel Sterling's office. My father looked at me for a long time. "You knew he was this kind of man?" "I knew enough." "And you stayed?" There are questions loving parents ask that carry guilt even when they mean concern. I met his eyes. "I stayed until leaving would not destroy us." He nodded once. That was all. No speeches. No blame. Just the quiet acceptance families arrive at when survival has already happened and they are trying to figure out how to honor it without reopening the wound. Back at the SRO that night, Julian texted from another number. "How long do you think you can hide?" I replied, "You are scaring me." The answer came fast. "You should be scared." I set the phone down and took a long breath. Threats are useful when they arrive in writing. By the next morning, Maya had worse news. He moved $20 million through an intermediary entity. Hastily. Very. Collateral? Shares in a subsidiary. I smiled but without joy. Men like Julian are never more dangerous than when they realize certainty is gone. They become improvisers. An improvisation leaves fingerprints. "Let it move," I said. "Do not block it." Later that same day, the HR department from the small office called to offer me the job. I accepted. I started on Monday. The work was simple. Data entry, filing, scheduling. I was overqualified and invisible, which was perfect. I needed a place where people would remember me as punctual, polite, and too tired to cause trouble. During lunch breaks, I listened more than I spoke. People told the truth around quiet women. They always had. By midweek, Sterling called. 2 more irregularities confirmed. An in-depth audit request is being prepared. Industry rumors will likely surface first. When? Before the week ends. Good. He paused. "How is your family?" "Holding. And you?" I looked around the little office at fluorescent light, stacked trays, half-dead plants, the ordinary machinery of a life no one envies. "Steadier than I look," I said. That night around midnight there was a knock on my door. Not downstairs. Not at the alley entrance. My door. I stood up in the dark and did not turn on the light. "Who is it?" "Open the door, Evelyn." "Julian." Too close. Too sure. My heart beat hard once, then settled. "Go back. Open the door. You need to leave." I took out my phone and lit the emergency screen. "If you do not leave, I am calling the police." "You would not dare." I held the glowing screen in silence. Then I heard his breath through the door, rough and humiliated, and finally the retreating steps. Moments later, a car started outside and pulled away too fast. I sat on the bed afterward with cold hands and a very clear mind. He had crossed a line. And every line he crossed made the next step easier for me. The following morning, the first vague articles appeared online. No names. No full allegations. Just language that people inside the industry would recognize immediately. Cash flow pressure. Informal review. Unverified concerns tied to a major real estate group. My office colleagues whispered over coffee. Someone said a friend at a bank had heard something ugly. Someone else said firms like that always look stronger than they are until 1 week they do not. I pretended to learn everything for the first time. Inside, the net tightened. Julian called 5 times by noon. On the 6th call, I answered. "What have you done?" He asked. "Nothing. Do not lie to me. I am at work." "Work." He spat the word. "In that little office?" "Yes." He was breathing too fast. "We need to meet." "I do not think that is a good idea." "How much do you want?" There it was. The sentence I had been waiting for. Not because I needed money. Because it proved he still believed truth had a price if you offered it quickly enough. I closed my eyes and pictured him in his office, jacket off, tie loosened, expensive hands suddenly looking less steady than usual. I do not make deals, Julian. I will give you 50,000. No. 200. You think everything can be bought. Do not start performing morality now. I smiled. I am not performing anything. I am just tired. Then I hung up. A stream of messages followed. Read receipts are their own kind of power. I gave him none. That evening I visited my parents again, not because I had new information, but because there are moments in long wars when you need to look directly at what you are protecting. My mother tried not to show fear. My father tried not to show anger. Both failed a little. Good, I thought. Honesty in small amounts is still honesty. On the drive back, Maya called. Informal audit rumors are spreading through the industry. He knows. Of course he knows. Do you? Know what he is capable of when cornered? Yes. And? I drove in silence for a second. Then I said, capability is not immunity. That night I could not sleep immediately. The alley outside was loud, then quiet, then loud again. Somewhere a bottle broke. Somewhere a couple fought and made up inside the same 10 minutes. City life in its oldest form. I opened my notebook and wrote another line. He no longer believes I am weak. He only does not know where my strength is located. The next morning I arrived early to work. The office was still empty. I turned on the computer, arranged folders, and let ordinary routine calm the surface of me. At 9 Maya called. He signed a short-term loan. High interest. Nearly 20 million. Against what? Subsidiary shares. I entered the number into my private timeline spreadsheet from memory. That is poison, I said. Yes. Good. At 10:30 Sterling called. Official inquiry is moving. He will hear before the paperwork reaches the final desks. Support my parents if anything escalates. Already arranged. Thank you. A pause. Evelyn, he said with more care than usual, are you certain this is still about truth and not simply the satisfaction of seeing him afraid? It was a fair question. I looked out over the parking lot behind the office. Morning light on cracked asphalt. A delivery truck backing into a space too small. Then I answered honestly, fear is not my goal. It is just the first language men like him understand when they stop being obeyed. Sterling did not answer right away. Then he said, understood. That afternoon Julian called again. Where are you? At work. We need to settle this. There is nothing to settle. I can fix it. No, Julian. You can delay it. Those are different things. Silence. Then very softly, almost not his voice at all, he said, you are ruining me. I leaned back in the cheap office chair and stared at the ceiling tile above me. No, I said. I am no longer protecting you. He said my name once, but there was no authority left in it. Just disbelief. I ended the call. Sometimes the most dramatic moment in a long story is not a scream or a slap or a courtroom declaration. Sometimes it is a sentence said in a normal tone that redraws the whole map. By the end of the week, the city had started doing what cities do best. Talking. Not publicly enough to count as scandal. Not quietly enough to ignore. Clients hesitated. A lender requested clarifications. A board member asked questions he had apparently postponed asking for months. And beneath all of that, like a cable pulled under tension, ran the most dangerous shift of all. Julian no longer controlled the story. He could still spend money. He could still call people. He could still threaten, negotiate, flatter, or try to locate me through the old channels of pressure. But he could not restore certainty. And men built on certainty always look less like kings once uncertainty reaches their own bloodstream. On Sunday night, just before 11, he appeared outside my room again. This time I did not go to the door. I stood a few feet back and said, through the wood, what do you want? You. Not love. Not forgiveness. Not explanation. Possession in one syllable. I nearly pitied him then. Nearly. Go home, Julian. Open the door and say that to my face. I do not owe you my face anymore. His hand hit the door once flat, not a fist. A sound of frustration more than force. You think they care about you? He said. You think those lawyers and investigators and little office people care what happens to you when this is over? No, I said. I think they care enough about paper and liability and truth to do what you never believed anyone would do. And what is that? See you clearly. He said nothing. Then I added, because sometimes mercy is simply accuracy delivered on time. You taught me something, Julian. You taught me that when people depend on one person for everything, they become easy to control. You just never imagine one day that person might be you. A long silence followed. Then the sound of him leaving. No dramatic ending. No shouted promise. Just retreat. The next week moved fast. Once momentum enters systems larger than one marriage, emotions become less relevant than procedure. Requests were filed. Reviews initiated. Questions formalized. People who had once laughed at Julian's jokes started returning calls more slowly. Invitations thinned. Confidence became expensive. I did not watch any of it in person. That part matters. People imagine revenge as standing close enough to witness the fall. But the truest version of justice I have ever known required distance. I went to work. I ate lunch with my coworkers. I called my mother. I bought groceries with money that was actually mine, however modest the amount. I slept more deeply than I had in years. One afternoon, Sterling asked me to come in. When I arrived, he did not waste words. He is trying to liquidate selectively and move liabilities before the full inquiry gains shape. Will it help him? Not enough. He slid a document across the table. His voice remained neutral, but I had learned enough about him by then to hear the edge beneath it. We also have evidence of coercive financial behavior inside the marriage. It strengthens several things. For a second I could not speak. Not because I was shocked. Because there are moments when the private truth of your life appears in formal language, and even if you have been carrying it for years, seeing it translated into something recognized by the world can make the air feel different. I looked down at the page. Not dramatic words. No poetry. Just facts. Access controlled. Accounts restricted. Patterns of economic dependency enforced. History of intimidation tied to financial vulnerability. Evidence of retaliatory asset restriction after filing. Cold language. Beautiful language. Because cold language is what institutions use when they finally admit a thing happened. Sterling watched me carefully. Are you all right? Yes, I said. And for the first time in this entire process, I meant something different by it. I did not mean I was holding, or functioning, or enduring. I meant yes. I am coming back into my own life. A week later, my mother called while I was walking home from work. Her voice sounded lighter. The bank representative was much more careful today, she said. Different tone. Good. And that man has not come back here. He will not. You sound sure. I am. My father got on the line then, which he rarely did unless he had something he considered worth saying once. He said, I did not understand you before. Before when? Before all this. I thought keeping peace was the same as being safe. I stopped walking. Traffic passed at the end of the block. Someone laughed across the street. The sky was turning that thin gray-blue cities get just before evening commits. So did I, Dad. He exhaled. Come for dinner Sunday. I will. That Sunday, I brought dessert from a bakery near the office and sat at the same kitchen table where, years earlier, I had once defended Julian to my mother after she said there was something too polished about him. You think because a man is smooth he is safe, she had said. I thought she was being unfair. Now, over coffee and pie, she touched my hand and asked softly, Are you finally done being afraid of him? I thought about the question seriously. No, I said. Not exactly. Then what changed? I looked around the kitchen. The old curtains. The worn table edge. My father's reading glasses near the newspaper. The modest, imperfect world I had once considered proof that I had outgrown the life I came from. I realized, I said, that fear is not the same as obedience. My mother nodded as if I had given her the ending to a sentence she had been holding for years. In the months that followed, things continued not like a movie but like consequences. Which is better? Movies like clean climaxes. Real life prefers documentation. Julian did not vanish overnight. Men like him rarely do. They negotiate, reposition, deny, restructure, blame advisors, blame markets, blame betrayal, blame timing. They spend a fortune trying to turn accountability into misunderstanding. But there is a point after which narrative cannot save a person from pattern. And Julian's patterns had finally met paper. The penthouse sold. Not immediately. Eventually. With less dignity than he would have liked. Some projects stalled. Some partnerships dissolved. Some names that once opened doors stopped doing so. I heard these things in fragments, never from him. Through industry whispers. Through Sterling. Through silence where noise used to be. And me? I kept the job longer than I needed to. That surprises people when I tell this story. Why keep the small job after all of that? Why not move immediately into something grander, louder, more fitting for the woman at the center of such a careful undoing? Because I needed to learn the difference between survival and display. Because for years my life had been arranged around appearances. And because there was something deeply healing about earning modest money in a place where no one expected me to sparkle. I rented a better apartment 6 months later. Small, but with my own kitchen and a window that opened onto a courtyard full of ordinary sounds. I bought furniture slowly. Nothing on credit. Nothing chosen to impress. A table. A lamp. Bookshelves. Plates that match because I liked them, not because they photographed well. Maya came over the first week and stood in the middle of my living room looking pleased in her restrained way. "Suits you," she said. "What does? A life with no audience." I laughed harder than I had in months. She was right. That was the thing I had won that mattered most. Not the fear on Julian's face. Not the inquiries. Not even the fact that he had finally learned I was never as powerless as he believed. What mattered most was that I no longer needed anyone to misunderstand me in order to survive. A few months after that, I saw him once. Completely by accident. I was leaving a pharmacy on a wet afternoon when a black town car pulled up at the curb across the street. The door opened. Julian stepped out. For one absurd second, time folded. He looked almost the same from a distance. Well-cut coat. Controlled posture. Phone in hand. But the body always tells the truth before the face does. He moved like a man carrying invisible weight in places that once held only confidence. He looked up. Saw me. Stopped. Neither of us crossed the street. We stood there in the gray light with traffic between us and history all around us. Then he did something strange. He did not glare. He did not smirk. He did not perform disdain. He simply looked at me as if seeing, for the first time, the full cost of having mistaken silence for emptiness. I held his gaze. Not triumphantly. Just steadily. Because by then, I no longer needed him to feel small in order to feel whole. The light changed. Cars moved. Someone stepped between us. And when the space cleared, he had turned away. I kept walking. No dramatic music. No final line. Just one foot in front of the other, toward a life I had built with care instead of permission. People like neat morals, so let me offer one, though life is usually messier than this. A man who builds his power on your dependence will always believe your freedom is impossible until it is already underway. And by the time he understands it, what terrifies him is not your anger. It is your indifference to the version of him that once defined your future. I did not win because I was colder than Julian. I did not win because I became ruthless enough to match him. I won because one day I stopped confusing comfort with safety, silence with surrender, and endurance with destiny. I won because I learned slowly, awkwardly, in secret, and long before anyone applauded, that helplessness is often a role people force on you until you forget you can stop performing it. And I won because when the moment came, I did not waste my pain trying to look dramatic. I used it to become precise. That is the part one hopes someone hearing this understands. If your life is being arranged in ways that keep you grateful, dependent, apologetic, and small, do not wait for the perfect collapse to begin taking yourself seriously. Start with one record, one saved bill, one question, one skill, one private refusal to remain economically imaginary. You do not need to become loud overnight. You do not need to tell everyone. You do not even need a grand plan at first. Sometimes freedom begins in the least cinematic way possible. A notebook, a hidden envelope, a second email account, a friend who knows how to read what you have been trained to ignore, a quiet decision made long before anyone sees results. I used to think strength looked like confrontation. Now I think it often looks like preparation. Like learning while someone assumes you are decoration. Like watching while someone mistakes your stillness for surrender. Like refusing to spend your future just to make a point in the present. The day Julian froze my accounts, he believed he was teaching me what life looked like without him. He was wrong. What he really did was hand me the final proof that leaving had not been a betrayal of my marriage. It had been the first honest act of my adult life. And when his world finally began to crack under the weight of everything he thought he could conceal, I did not feel joy the way people imagine. I felt air. Room. The strange peace of no longer carrying a man inside my nervous system, as if he were climate. That is what freedom felt like to me. Not revenge. Oxygen. So if you are listening to this from a room where someone else controls the money, the narrative, the timing, the permissions, and has made you believe that your survival belongs to their mood, hear me clearly. Their certainty is not proof. Their money is not magic. And your dependence is not your identity. Do not underestimate what can grow in silence when the silence is no longer fear. Mine grew teeth, then timing, then doors, and finally a life.